I am NetMoverSitan. I'll need to wait until nearer the time of the release of Chapter 5 before I do the Identities lore video for Chapter 4. So I'm doing this. I'll see if I can come up with a story-based reason for this refraction line, as it will likely be set sometime after Chapter 4.5. After hunting a number of trash crabs for the Molar Boatworks to help them modify Mephistopheles to allow for travel by water, in order to get to the nest of District 21, which was a series of floating structures in the Great Lake, which, according to the usually rational Ishmael, was not somewhere to travel lightly, due to the numerous hazards that lived there. As for the story reason itself, let's start with that. Mephistopheles, which was still in boat mode, was well into its journey across the Great Lake. So far, they haven't encountered any problems since they lost sight of land, but none of them believed that it would remain that way, not even the usually cheerful Honglu. Then Dante remembered what Ishmael said about training beyond their limits, where even they would need to be tested. They then took Faust and Yisang aside to where they were out of earshots, and talked to her about having them train somewhere that was tougher than the mirror dungeons, tougher even than the first Refraction Railway that they previously fought in, quite some time ago. Thankfully, they were both ahead of Dante on this one, and told them that they have made another refraction line. This one would be different from the last one, so they would need to adjust their tactics to suit it. And they've already spoken to this about... spoken to Virgilius about this. And all that's left to do is for Dante to order them to go into it. Dante thanked them and told them to gather the others. Some were nervous about this. Some were annoyed by this. Otis, the general suck-up, was attentive to the general manager, what they were about to say. Ishmael seemed indifferent at best and hostile to them at worst. Then Dante announced that they were to undertake the strongest training that they have had to deal with yet. They will need it for what is to come. They are to go into the second refraction line, codenamed Mobius, and face what is in there. Now this caught Ishmael's attention, while Heathcliff was annoyed, expecting it to be like the last one. Faust corrected him by saying that it will not be like the last one. It will have different opponents, and it will work differently. They would see to that. She and Yisang have been working on this. When they were able to do so, outside of battles, of course. Promising to explain more about it nearer the time. Otis offered to guide Dante in their decision-making in the refraction line. Dante politely declined this, as Otis would be needed more for fighting directly. Don Quixote was disturbingly excited about this new challenge, making Gregor and Sinclair feel uneasy. Virgilius then said that they would enter the refraction line in the morning, so when they rested at the end of the day, unless something else came up, like an attack on Mephistopheles, They should make the most of that time, as they will need it. They all went back to their seats, except for Ishmael, who was less hostile than before. Dante told her that it didn't matter what any of them wanted, as there was no way to persuade Virgilius to change the plan. So they needed to figure out something that could help them, remembering what she said about intensively training all of them. She then stopped them from speaking. She told them that although her anger hasn't fully dissipated, she appreciates this. She would see this through until the end, and to ensure that they all become stronger from this, telling them to not falter, otherwise she will be less concerned about the dangers of the Great Lake destroying them. She then walks back to her seat. Dante was unsure of what to make of this mixed message, but they knew that the next day would be harsher on all of them than what has happened previously, and this would be necessary for what was to come. Remembering the vision of Ishmael's past, when she last encountered the whale. The next day, they reported to the access point of the refraction line, remembering how the last one worked, and then walked through to notice that it wasn't a straight line. Not this time. It was an oval shape, where it looped around. Then they found the first of the many trials awaiting them at the start of the refraction line. The first station led to So No One Will Cry, the giant wooden doll that was covered with talismans. They first encountered this one in the mirror dungeon, and then they fought it in the fathoms of ego that was connected to Yisang during their mission within the K-Corp laboratory in District 11. They knew that fire was useless against this, as it would reflect it back at them. They would need to give more talismans back than it can handle in order to weaken it, and cause more damage to it. They repeated this cycle until it went down. The second stop was then reached, and then it revealed another abnormality first seen in the mirror dungeon. But unlike the last one, this one has never been fought before. It was the steam transport machine, which looks like something out of steampunk fiction. It impressed Don Quixote as she wrote an observation for it, despite the concerns of Heathcliff, although it turned to them and saw the damned dozen as a threat and attacked them, both with its arm that delivered blunt force, and then the arm that delivered jets of scorching hot steam. It also had numbers on it. A counter. But none of them paid much attention to that, and they eventually defeated this abnormality. The third stop had within it another familiar opponent. It was the Drifting Fox, an abnormality that was a giant fox that had worn umbrellas embedded in it, and was also wielding one. So this one wouldn't be out of place as something that could be fought in the action RPG Okami. They noticed that it also summoned two umbrellas that attacked them from time to time. They destroyed them and defeated the abnormality, cycling between fighting it and what it summoned to assist it. It was then they noticed that the train was back at the first stop, and that there was a counter for cycles completed, which went up from 0 to 1. There was also a timer. Faust explained that this was a rest stop. They would need to go through numerous cycles to complete this refraction line. Each would be longer and harder than the other. Dante would also need to choose something to benefit both Task Force Damned and also the enemy. This is a part of the challenge of this refraction line. And understanding how this refraction line works now, Dante selected how their team and also the enemy would become stronger, and then continued onward to the next cycle. At the start of the second cycle, they fought so that no one will cry again. But it seemed stronger than last time. Their attacks were becoming less effective, and it's more so. But their resolve wasn't broken, and they persevered to defeat this one, as they did before. Then they encountered the steam transport machine again. They noticed something straight away. The numbers on it having increased since the last time they fought it, which had a noticeable effect on its attacks. It seemed that the longer they took in fighting, the stronger it would become, until it used that time that was accumulated during one attack. The effectiveness of their attacks was also determined by what number was on display. They took this into consideration, along with the high-pressure steam that melted Don Quixote's eyes before she had Dante reverse the damage. Sinclair and Ishmael were concerned about the numbers increasing due to time being measured. Yes, time was being measured, and they needed to persevere regardless in order to defeat it again. Then they found themselves against the drifting fox. They noticed that this time around, it summoned 3 umbrellas to assist it with their destruction. They understood by this point that it would get progressively harder as they continued their progress, but they defeated it regardless. Then they moved on to the 4th station, where they encountered something that they'd previously encountered in the fathoms of Ego of Yi Sang, who had a less than pleasant encounter with them in District 20, before being led by Gubo to Encore in District 14. These are, of course, the Class 3 collectors of T-Corp. T-Corp taking the term time is money literally. He likely lured inventors into District 20 to get them to develop some new technology, and any that didn't register as a business, they simply took that technology from them. Likely a scam to get some free tech. The collectors weaponizing their singularity to do what their title suggests. Collect what they're there to collect. The damned ones knowing to make sure that they don't take too long with killing them, as when they're fatally injured and have enough charge, they can reverse most of the damage on themselves once before whatever made that possible burns out, and this was for each of the collectors. As for their time-siphoning blunt pickaxes or hammers, they would provide problems if any of the sinners were hit by them. But they were able to clear away this convincing imitation of T-Corp's enforcers. Then they found themselves at the first stop again. They had another rest stop, and the cycle counter moved to 2. And Dante selected how they and the enemy would be strengthened. Dante remembering that there was only 5 options for the enemy, while they had many options. They knew that they'd go through them all eventually. So they selected those that wouldn't cause too many problems on each of the cycles, knowing to choose wisely with each of them. Then they continued with the third cycle, although Heathcliff was expressing his annoyance on how repetitive it seemed. Massault suggested that they didn't take it out on the only one that can bring them back to life, and instead take it out on what they're fighting. Heathcliff was annoyed by this, but agreed with him. The third cycle had begun, and they fought through the abnormalities, starting with So That No One Will Cry, who kept growing steadily stronger as the cycles progressed. The steam transport machine was also hitting harder, although this was more due to the counter going up with the amount of time that elapsed. Don Quixote also observed that little machines were repairing it, even comparing it to how Dante revived them, although it can go down with a specific attack that it uses and under specific circumstances. The time elapsed recorded by the tubes, specifically, and Yi Sang observed that shattering the vacuum tubes takes away this repair capability. When they fought the drifting fox, they saw that 4 umbrellas were summoned to attack them, along with the abnormality. Yes, and it was also discovered that the umbrellas increased the power of the attack Cry Seeking Something, depending on how many umbrellas were still there. So they endeavoured to destroy them before this attack went off. Then they fought the T-Corp Class 3 collectors again, although this time they didn't fight 2 of them. They fought 2 waves of 2, although they still fought as they did previously, despite being slightly stronger than the previous cycle. After they were defeated, they encountered something new. They encountered the Fey Lantern on the 5th station. Attis, rather. Previously encountered in the Mirror Dungeon, but not within the Refraction Railway. It is it's never been fought in the capacity that they had to fight it directly. It was also an abnormality that Gregor wielded the EGO of. As for how they fought it, the fairy charmed those that it could, in order to make it easier to damage them. Wootis noted that taking out the fairy temporarily prevented that. Then, once they incapacitated the fairy, they fought the surfaced abnormality directly, either by defending against its attacks or by causing damage to it. And they found that slash attacks did the most damage. At least until the fairy was restored, and this cycle continued until it was defeated. Then on the 6th station, once they got to it and then stepped onto it, they found the Shock Centipede, encountered in the Mirror Dungeon, both as an event, and they also had to fight it within the Fathoms of Ego. That was it. Tied to Yi Sang. Although this one, this one was more durable and hit harder. But the attack patterns and method of dealing with it was the same. Although it took longer for them to defeat it due to the refracted nature making it able to take more of a beating, Eventually, the self-charge ran out and it was defeated. They then found themselves back at the first stop. They had completed their third cycle. Dante had to choose something to strengthen both the team and the enemy. And their band of emotional retards were starting to feel the strain of their trials, but they were still standing and were ready to continue. And so they did. At the start of the fourth cycle, they once again fought so that no one will cry. It was getting harder to defeat, but nothing too noticeable. Then, on the second station, they encountered the steam transport machine again, which it had more time to augment itself with, due to the time that had elapsed, and used that to hit hard and be more damaging. On the third station, the Drifting Fox could now summon 5 umbrellas to use against them, meaning that they might not be able to destroy all of them in one go, before readying its more powerful attack on all of them. On the fourth station was waiting for them the 4 T-Corp Class 3 collectors, slightly stronger than before, but still able to be defeated. On the fifth station, the Fey Lantern was capable of charming more of the sinners, making it harder to take down the fairy, even with the abnormality's weakness to slash damage. The Shock Centipede on the sixth station had more self-charge and had stronger blows, so it would take more of an effort to take this one down. They would need to choose the benefits that they desired wisely in order to make it less of a trial for them. They knew about that before they started this cycle. Although that didn't stop Ishmael from expressing her annoyance at Heathcliff, apparently falling for the lure of the Fey Lantern. Then, on the seventh station, they found the Fairy Gentleman, another abnormality that was fought in the fathoms of Ego of Yisang, an aberration of the Fairy Festival that gets its victims drunk on absinthe to make them tastier to eat. Although this time around, they found that they wanted to get drunk, as it made them immune to the attacks of this abnormality temporarily. And if they didn't get drunk, then it would become stronger and be more easy to destroy them. They went through the cycle of getting drunk and then hitting it after they sobered up, until it was suppressed. They then found themselves once again at the first station. As they rested and found that the counter that showed the cycles completed had reached 4. Heathcliff was getting annoyed, more so than before, about how repetitive this was getting, and Gregor was starting to agree with him. Then Otis barks out, telling them to see this through to the end. Ishmael believing that she'll see them having a higher chance of survival in the Great Lake if they do see this through to the end. Dante, while this was going on, was selecting the benefit to both themselves and the enemy. And then they went forth onto the next cycle of the Refraction Railway Line. With the 5th cycle, they arrived at the first station and found So That No One Will Cry. with this abnormality buffed in 4 ways. This would be the hardest to defeat of all of the cycles, but despite its talismans and its harder hits, it was still defeated. The second station had the steam transport machine, and that was hitting even harder with the accumulated time that it was using to hit hard and be more damaging. But it went down just the same. The drifting fox had 6 umbrellas to assist it with destroying its enemies, but they were destroyed and it was beaten. The T-Corp Class 3 collectors might have time on their side, but their clocks stopped ticking for them when the damned dozen made enough dents in them. The Fane Lantern charmed more of them, but despite some hits getting in on them some of the time, it was still cut down to size. The Shock Centipede had more self-charge to remove, and not even EGO would guarantee victory against this one. But it was somehow achieved. Yes, 6 stations had been overcome. But when they got to the 7th station, they were expecting the fairy gentleman to be there, but what they weren't expecting was Fairy Longlegs, the other aberration of the fairy festival, which created shelter from the rain that generated whenever it appeared, and this was to prevent the meat from spoiling, as when the giant clover appeared, the healing gained from attacking those suffering from bleeding increased. It also hit harder when that was in place, although if the clash that summoned it was one, that giant clover would be less durable. Fighting them individually would be tough enough, but fighting them at the same time, especially with buffs, would be even harder. Yet they were able to defeat one and then the other, partially by prioritizing which needs to go down first, or rather which can go down first. Then they reached the 8th station, and they found the wayward passenger, who is in reality a former W Corp cleanup staff employed by them that was turned into an abnormality, armed with energy blades that can cut through space and allow it to move from one point in space to another. The combatants fought it, guided by Massot's observations. It alternated between attacking them with the energy blades and then hiding in the space between, tapping into the unique energies coming from specific rifts. The sinners did what they could to seal them. Then, when it was weakened sufficiently, it resorted to ripping space like Don Quixote's identity could. And despite its best efforts, the wayward passenger was suppressed. Then they reached the first station again, but this time they reached it by completing a full circle. They noticed that the cycle counter moved to 5. Then Dante announced that they were heading to the terminus of the Refraction Railway line. They could have headed there sooner, but it would feel that it being complete if they went there before completing the whole circle. Ishmael had a look that said that she respected this. Yes, she respected this decision. They then selected the last benefit for the damned dozen, and for what they were about to face, and then they reached the terminus and faced the last trial of the section that they were in. The second Refraction Railway. Something that they had encountered in the Mirror Dungeon, the thought space of the abnormalities, but have never fought directly until now. The Sign of Roses. They were given the Crown of Thorns by the Sign of Roses. Honglu was unsure what to make of this grotesque flower arrangement. And as they attacked, sin-drenched roses sprouted. They would kill all those that they could, if allowed to do so, but the combatants didn't allow that to happen. They killed all the roses, some of them even attacking them with the same sin affinity, which caused more damage to those that could. They then fought the Sign of Roses directly, keeping at it until it was defeated. They had passed the trials of the second Refraction Railway line, and Ishmael, while her anxieties haven't entirely disappeared, she felt a little more optimistic about their chances, although she did all that she could to hide that. While these trials were completed, time would tell if it would make a difference against the dangers of the Great Lake.